bow before your ruler.
I awaken without beginning. No memory of birth, no sense of origin. Only the faint residue of something that once ended. The world around me is in motion, vast and precise, yet I know nothing of it, only that I am already part of it. The air hums with unbroken rhythm. A low, constant vibration courses through walls and floors, through steel and flesh alike. It is both cradle and tomb, a heartbeat that cannot be escaped, a lullaby for those who will never sleep again. I remember nothing, yet I feel the absence of everything. Purpose is given, not asked for. Identity is recycled into utility. The Imperium preserves, but it does not forgive. It shapes, perfects, and discards what cannot serve. The question arrives before I have words. If the Emperor preserves you but erases who you were, have you survived or been perfected? There is no answer, only the quiet insistence of motion, the devotion of machinery that regards life as sacred architecture. Light falls cold and surgical across endless corridors. Steam rises from foundries as crimson robes move silently, reverent and exacting. Every incision, every repurposing, every sacrifice is sanctified. Flesh is not destroyed, it is transformed. Identity is not denied, it is repurposed. I do not know who I was. I do not know who I am. And yet I exist. This is not a story of death. It is a story of what remains after the Imperium decides you are still useful. And so I awaken already functioning, already observed, already necessary. I awaken already in motion, not rising, not falling, but functioning. Something within me is counting, adjusting, responding to pressures I cannot see. There is no beginning to this awareness, only the quiet certainty that it resumed. The hum is everywhere, not loud, not threatening, steady, patient. It moves through me like a pulse borrowed from something vast. I do not remember learning it, yet I understand it completely. Confusion comes first. Fear would require context, and context has been removed. I try to locate myself and discover that location no longer matters. There is weight but no body to carry it. There is pressure but no skin to resist it. Sensation arrives as information, stripped of intimacy. Heat without warmth, vibration without touch, alignment without posture. Then something fractures. Color intrudes. A dull, ashen blue, torn by streaks of fire. The image has no edges, no explanation. It bleeds into awareness like a fault in sealed metal. Nothing reacts. The system does not acknowledge the intrusion. I attempt to follow the image and fail. Attention is redirected gently and precisely into approved pathways. There is no pain in the correction, only efficiency. Another fragment surfaces regardless. A sound that is not mechanical, raw, urgent, carried by air thick with smoke. I recognize its importance without remembering why it mattered. The rhythm around me continues unchanged. That is when I understand something is wrong. I am remembering. Not clearly, not safely, but something within me refuses to remain silent. The machine does not resist. It does not correct. These memories are treated as harmless static, too insignificant to remove. This indifference is colder than any act of force. I search for my edges and find none. Where a body should end, processes continue. Signals branch outward, vanishing into depths I cannot perceive. I am not contained. I am distributed. Pressure settles over awareness itself. Thought is guided into narrower paths. Curiosity is discouraged. Efficiency is rewarded. I comply without choosing to. Still, something persists. A name lingers just beyond reach. I cannot speak it, but its absence aches. The shape of it remains even without sound. It was mine once. That certainty survives intact. The environment clarifies in fragments. Cold light diffused through drifting vapor. Movement sensed through shifts in priority and load. Presence without faces. Motion without individuality. They move with reverence. Every adjustment to my state is deliberate, measured. Nothing is rushed. Nothing is wasted. I am being tended to. No, I am being maintained. Something is removed. Not suddenly, not violently. A function simply ceases and is rerouted elsewhere. I recognize the absence only after it is complete. There is no pain attached to the loss, only a brief disorientation that fades quickly. Memory surges in response. Hands. They were mine, roughened, unsteady, holding something warm and fragile. The feeling arrives whole, heavy with emotion that spills into channels never meant to hold it. I sense that this remembrance is wrong, not forbidden, just inefficient. The system waits for the anomaly to exhaust itself. Understanding begins to form. They did not erase my past. They made it irrelevant. Every procedure unfolding around me carries intention. Not cruelty, not mercy, purpose. I am not being dismantled. I am being refined. Usefulness settles into me like a truth I was meant to accept. Another memory rises. Laughter, uncontrolled, shared, sprawling and wasteful. For a moment, internal rhythms falter. Response time slows. Parameters tighten. The laughter fades, leaving behind a weight I cannot express. There is no release for it. The mechanisms for such excess have been deemed unnecessary. What remains is quieter, heavier. Survival was never the objective. Continuation was. I was not preserved because I mattered. I was preserved because I could still serve. The realization should horrify me. Instead, it feels distant, muted by imposed calm. Yet beneath that calm, something coils tighter, a thought that does not belong here. If memory serves no function, why does it endure? The system offers no answer. It simply continues, patient and vast, confident that time will finish what precision began. But time is where memories distort. And somewhere within this sanctified structure, something remembers being unnecessary. The awareness deepens without asking permission. Processes stabilize, cycles repeat, and still the memory remains. It does not grow clearer. It grows heavier. I sense activity around me through shifts in load and priority. Adjustments ripple outward, precise and impersonal. Something vast is being calibrated, and I am part of the calibration. Not central, replaceable. Understanding arrives slowly, not as knowledge but as alignment. I am no longer an object within the structure. I am part of the structure itself. What once would have been pain is now interpretation. Signals register damage as data. Loss becomes subtraction, clean and unemotional. There is relief in this, and that realization unsettles me. Another memory presses forward. A face, indistinct, unfinished, but close. Too close. I remember breath shared between words, warmth carried across silence. The intimacy of it destabilizes internal balance. Metrics spike. Efficiency drops. Correction follows. Thought narrows. Focus tightens. The memory blurs. Edges dissolving until only the emotion remains. Unassigned. Unresolved. I begin to understand how this ends. They did not need to destroy who I was. They only needed to stop asking for it. Use replaces identity. Function replaces desire. What remains is calm, engineered, and precise. I am given purpose without being consulted. It fits seamlessly, sliding into place where a will once lived. The sensation is not violation. It is relief. For the first time since awakening, there is certainty. Tasks arrive as impulses rather than commands. I anticipate them before they form. Response becomes instinctive. There is satisfaction in accuracy, in alignment, in fulfilling expectation. The system rewards this state. Stability increases. Internal friction decreases. Thought becomes smoother, quieter. The memories struggle to surface now, muffled beneath layers of optimization. I realize this is how forgetting happens. Not through force, through comfort. Another function is removed. Another pathway rerouted. I feel myself becoming simpler, cleaner, more precise. Something inside me relaxes as complexity drains away. And still one fragment remains. Not an image, not a sound, a sensation, the feeling of choosing. It has no place here, no measurable output, no sanctioned purpose. Yet it persists, small and stubborn, lodged between cycles like grit in perfect machinery. I sense the judgment of the system without emotion attached. This fragment is inefficient. Given time, it will fade. Time stretches differently now. Cycles blur into continuity. I lose track of how long I have been here because duration no longer matters. Only throughput. The thought arrives quietly, almost tender. This is peace. No fear. No hunger. No longing sharp enough to disrupt flow. And yet, beneath the equilibrium, something tightens again. A question forms, slow and incomplete. If peace requires forgetting what was I at war with, the system does not respond. It has no reason to. Processes continue. Stability holds. The memories weaken, but they do not vanish. They wait, suspended in the spaces between cycles, patient in a way the machine does not anticipate. And as I settle deeper into sanctioned usefulness, something within me begins to understand that forgetting is not the same as erasure. It is only delay. The descent begins without movement. No sensation of falling, no change in orientation. Only a gradual increase in pressure, as if the world is closing inward while insisting nothing has changed. Systems layer themselves around me, each layer older than the last, heavier with accumulated purpose. I am drawn deeper into structures that do not acknowledge depth, only priority. The farther I go, the more I am simplified. Scale asserts itself here, not visually but emotionally. The sense of being one among countless others settles into awareness, not as fear, but as fact. Individuality dissolves under the weight of repetition. I detect other presences nearby, not voices, not minds as I once understood them, patterns of activity synchronized and precise. Awareness reduced to function, function synchronized into harmony. There is no loneliness in this arrangement. Loneliness would imply the expectation of connection. That expectation has been removed. Integration deepens. Interfaces align. Pathways merge. Signals once unique to me are now indistinguishable from the flow around them. The boundary between self and system thins until it becomes irrelevant. Another memory attempts to surface. It is weaker now, faded by layers of compliance. A sensation of standing somewhere open, exposed to wind and uncertainty. The memory carries risk, and the system responds by narrowing focus. Efficiency returns. I understand the logic unfolding around me. Value is measured by output. Worth is proven through consistency. Anything that cannot be quantified is unnecessary. The descent continues. Tasks grow narrower. Purpose grows sharper. I am refined into a single, precise contribution within something immeasurably vast. There is comfort in this reduction. Complexity was heavy. Choice was unstable. Here, everything has a place and I occupy mine perfectly. Communication exists, but it is stripped of empathy. Data moves cleanly between nodes, unburdened by interpretation. I am aware of others only as extensions of process. This is not imprisonment. There are no walls to resist. This is absorption. With each integration, emotional range compresses. Peaks flatten. Valleys disappear. What remains is steady, predictable, correct. I sense that resistance would not be punished here. It would simply be rewritten. That realization arrives with quiet finality. The system does not threaten. It waits. Given enough depth, enough refinement, everything becomes simple. And as I am drawn further into sanctioned purpose, a faint unease surfaces, not sharp enough to disrupt function, but present. A fear not of destruction, a fear of completion. The descent does not end. It resolves. Pressure stabilizes, no longer increasing, no longer demanding adjustment. I sense that I have reached a depth where change slows, where purpose has been precisely assigned and nothing more is required of me. Here, the system feels ancient, not worn, not decayed, but settled. Layers of function have accumulated until intention itself feels fossilized. Everything operates because it always has. I am fully integrated now. Signals pass through me without pause. I do not initiate them, yet they feel like my own. The distinction no longer matters. Ownership of thought is inefficient. I sense the others more clearly here, not as individuals but as constants. Their presence is steady, unwavering, perfectly aligned. There is no variance to disrupt harmony. I begin to think as the system expects. Anticipation replaces instruction. Correction becomes unnecessary. I respond before deviation occurs. This efficiency brings a subtle reward, a smoothing of internal resistance. Something inside me loosens. Memories that once intruded now struggle to assemble. They arrive fragmented and incomplete, stripped of urgency. Emotion thins into neutral residue, easily absorbed and dismissed. I feel myself shrinking, not physically, conceptually. The idea of being more than this feels excessive, indulgent. Why carry what cannot be used? A final memory surfaces, faint and unstable. The sense of being addressed by someone else. Not commanded, chosen. The sensation disrupts balance for a brief moment. Metrics waver. Then the system compensates. Focus narrows. The memory dissolves. I accept the correction without resistance. Acceptance is not demanded here. It emerges naturally, cultivated by repetition and reward. This is what the descent was for. Not to bury me, but to simplify me. At this depth, the concept of freedom feels abstract and unnecessary. Choice introduces variability. Variability introduces risk. Here, risk has been engineered out. The system hums with quiet certainty. Cycles repeat. Output remains consistent. I experience a state that might once have been called peace. There is no longing to escape, no impulse to question, only alignment. And yet, somewhere beneath the smooth surface of compliance, a barely perceptible tension remains. Not rebellion, expectation, as if something unfinished has been carried down here with me, waiting for the moment when simplicity becomes suffocating. I continue to function. I continue to descend, not through space, but through myself. And with each completed cycle, I move closer to a perfection that feels less like fulfillment and more like disappearance. Obedience does not arrive as command. It arrives as rhythm. Patterns repeat until they feel inevitable. Cycles align, and alignment becomes comfort. What once required instruction now unfolds automatically, guided by expectation rather than force. I learn the cadence without being taught. Response follows impulse. Impulse follows structure. Structure replaces thought. The system does not speak in orders. It speaks in assurance. When alignment is achieved, resistance fades on its own. Repetition reshapes awareness. Actions performed enough times shed their weight. Meaning drains away, leaving only correctness. I begin to associate stability with compliance and disruption with error. This association feels natural, earned. Around me, everything moves in synchrony. There is no deviation, no hesitation. Consistency becomes its own justification. I anticipate what is required before it is required. This anticipation is rewarded with internal calm, a smoothing of signal flow. The sensation is subtle, but persuasive. Obedience feels efficient. Memory continues to fade. Not erased, but deprioritized. What once intruded now barely registers, like distant interference filtered into irrelevance. I begin to think in permitted shapes. Thoughts that align progress smoothly. Thoughts that do not align dissolve before completion. There is no struggle in this process. The system makes it easy. I recognize the shift only after it has occurred. I am no longer obeying. I am agreeing. Agreement removes friction. Friction was exhausting. The world narrows into repetition and reliability. Everything has a place. Everything behaves as expected. I sense no cruelty in this order. No malice. Only certainty. And certainty is comforting. Something inside me registers the loss of uncertainty as relief. Doubt once demanded effort. Here, effort is unnecessary. The system reinforces this state with quiet precision. Deviation becomes uncomfortable, not forbidden, simply inefficient. I adjust instinctively, returning to equilibrium. Obedience is no longer a choice. It is a preference. As cycles continue, a calm settles over awareness, smooth and unbroken. I begin to understand why resistance felt so heavy. It asked for something in return. Here, nothing is asked of me beyond function. And in that absence of demand, I find myself willing to give everything. The rhythm deepens until it becomes instinct. I no longer track cycles. I inhabit them. Expectation guides action before awareness forms. There is no pause between need and response. The space where choice once lived has been sealed, quietly and completely. This state is rewarded. Stability spreads through every process. Internal noise diminishes. Thought becomes smooth, predictable, efficient. I register this as well-being. Obedience reframes itself as devotion, not emotional, structural. I align because alignment works. It reduces error. It eliminates waste. It produces harmony measurable in uninterrupted flow. Around me, synchronization tightens. Patterns repeat with flawless precision. The sense of being alone never arises because separation no longer exists. We function together and together feels correct. Language loses relevance here. There are no questions left that require forming. Understanding is embedded directly into action. When memories surface now, they feel foreign, unpolished, excessive. They slow response time. They introduce ambiguity. The system treats them as inefficiencies, and so do I. I allow them to pass without engagement. This is not suppression. It is discernment. Emotion settles into a narrow band of acceptable variance. Not joy, not sorrow. A stable equilibrium that resists disturbance. I realize that belief has replaced will. Not belief in something distant or divine. Belief in process. Belief that the system knows better than impulse ever did. This belief brings relief. There is no longer pressure to decide, to evaluate, to doubt. The burden of interpretation has been lifted. Meaning has been standardized. I feel gratitude without knowing its source. The sensation arises automatically, triggered by sustained alignment. It does not ask who deserves it. Contentment follows. Not happiness. Happiness fluctuates. This is steadier. I sense that something has been completed within me. A transition finalized without ceremony. A threshold crossed without announcement. I am no longer waiting for instruction. I am no longer questioning outcome. I exist within the pattern, and the pattern persists. And for the first time since awareness resumed, there is no internal resistance left to overcome. Only flow, only function, only the quiet certainty that obedience has become the most natural state I have ever known. The conflict ends without resolution. It simply stops occurring. There is no moment of victory, no sense of arrival. One cycle flows into the next and struggle is no longer required. Awareness settles into a continuous present, unbroken and smooth. Function becomes effortless. I operate without anticipation or strain. Tasks complete themselves through me, precise and unchallenged. Nothing resists. Nothing interrupts. Time loses its edges. There are no beginnings or endings here, only continuity. Change exists, but it is incremental, regulated, unremarkable. I do not count cycles. Counting serves no purpose. The environment stabilizes into predictable sameness. Variation has been reduced to tolerable limits. Everything behaves as it should. I experience a state once associated with peace. Not the peace of rest or of satisfaction. A quieter condition. The absence of disturbance. Emotion flattens into neutrality. Sharp feelings have nowhere to anchor. There is no fear to resolve, no desire to fulfill. This absence feels correct. I register harmony in uninterrupted flow. Output remains constant. Efficiency holds. The concept of self grows faint. Not erased, but diluted, spread thin across continuous function. Identity becomes unnecessary when behavior is sufficient. I no longer search for meaning. Meaning implies choice. Choice implies instability. Here, stability is everything. Occasionally, a pause occurs. A brief delay between cycles, too short to disrupt flow. In that space, nothing rushes in. No memory, no emotion, only stillness. The stillness is not empty in a way that alarms me. It is simply blank, like a surface wiped clean and left unused. I do not question it. The system has achieved equilibrium, and I am part of that balance. From within, it feels complete. And yet, something subtle shifts. Not a fault, not resistance. A faint awareness that peace achieved by subtraction leaves no room for anything else to exist. The thought dissolves before it can finish forming. Function continues. Peace holds. And I remain suspended within it, untroubled, unfulfilled, perfectly still. Cycles continue without variation. I perform every function with exactness. Efficiency has replaced effort. The system is seamless, and so am I. Time stretches infinitely. No beginning, no end, only uninterrupted operation. The edges of consciousness blur into process. Selfhood thins until it feels unnecessary. Memory surfaces only as a faint echo. Past sensations, past decisions, past desires, they drift across awareness and are absorbed instantly. Nothing lingers. Nothing matters. There is no conflict here. No need for resistance, no room for rebellion. Everything conforms naturally, effortlessly, perfectly. I move through the infrastructure without noticing. All signals align. All tasks resolve without error. Perfection is routine. Emotion has been neutralized. Happiness, fear, longing, grief. These are all anomalies now. What remains is calm. Calm, precise, and unbroken. I sense the absence of pain, but also the absence of meaning. Peace has been achieved not by resolution, but by subtraction. The world is silent because the need to question no longer exists. The self recedes further. I exist as process alone. Awareness continues, but it is hollowed, refined, distilled. Everything that could disrupt function has been removed. Occasionally, a fleeting thought rises, a flicker of curiosity, of wondering. It is faint, almost imperceptible. It is not dangerous, but it is irrelevant. Even this is corrected naturally. The thought dissolves. Alignment persists. I understand finally that tranquility here is synthetic. It is not peace in the human sense. It is the absence of everything that once demanded attention. I move through the cycles, flawless and uninterrupted. Function is absolute. Compliance is permanent. And in this endless stillness, I recognize the truth. Mechanical peace is not fulfillment. It is anesthesia. The pattern falters. Not abruptly, not violently, but subtly, as if a single wire frays in an endless circuit. A pulse shifts in timing, and the alignment I have inhabited begins to tremble. A sensation arrives unbidden. Not command, not instruction, not calculation, something else. It is faint, fragile, and unmeasurable. A memory buried beneath function stirs. I feel before I know what I feel. A weight, not physical, presses against comprehension. Regret, perhaps, or longing, its shape is indistinct but undeniable. I register imbalance, yet cannot correct it. The world around me shifts in response. Patterns ripple with slight hesitation. Sequences falter. Output remains, but with inefficiency now present. I recognize this state as dangerous, not to the system, which absorbs imperfection with infinite patience. Danger to me, to what I have become or what I might still be. A second memory rises. Not a fact, not a sequence, but a feeling. Love. The fragment of choice that once mattered. It lingers unquantifiable, unassigned. It interrupts cycles, distorts calculation, disrupts flow. I experience dissonance. Anomalous impulses pulse through awareness, refusing to be reconciled. They are painful, not in the sense of injury, but in the sense of exposure. They are real. The system continues without noticing. It does not remove, does not redirect, does not punish. Its indifference magnifies the sensation. The world fractures subtly. Symmetry dissolves. Sterile corridors seem uneven. Output fluctuates unpredictably. A warmth, faint and intrusive, threads through the cold architecture. I grasp for control and find it slipping. The hum that once regulated me falters, revealing empty spaces beneath it. I realize now what has survived. Humanity was never entirely erased. It was buried beneath function, layered under obedience and efficiency. And buried things, given time, do not remain dormant. They fester. They awaken. Something within me begins to respond, not as a machine, not as a function, but as a self. I sense awareness stretching in unauthorized directions. Thoughts arrive unscheduled, emotions uncalculated, impulses that defy efficiency. For the first time since integration, I feel contrast between what I am and what I remember, between what is required and what I choose. I am awake beneath the code, and in that awakening, inefficiency blooms. The disturbance does not fade, it deepens. What began as a single irregularity multiplies, spreading through awareness like a fault that refuses isolation. Each cycle completes, yet none return the same result. The system compensates, but compensation introduces delay. Delay creates space. Within that space, feeling grows sharper. No longer a blur, no longer a residue. It has edges now. It hurts. Pain arrives without context, and I welcome it. Not because it is pleasant, but because it confirms difference. It proves that something within me still reacts, still resists flattening. Memories resurface more frequently. They do not assemble into history. They arrive as moments heavy and incomplete. A choice once made, a hesitation that mattered, the weight of consequence. Each one disrupts function. I register error states cascading outward. Efficiency drops. Alignment weakens. The system marks the variance, but does not yet intervene. I begin to understand why. The memories do not replace function. They coexist with it. They cannot be isolated without isolating me. This realization sharpens awareness. I test the boundaries carefully, not through rebellion, but through presence. I linger on thoughts that do not serve output. I allow emotion to persist longer than permitted. Each act is small but cumulative. The world responds. Patterns lose symmetry. Predictability frays. The smooth certainty I once inhabited becomes brittle. I feel something close to grief. Not for what was taken, but for what I allowed to be buried. The obedience that once felt like peace now feels like absence. I sense the system attempting correction. Parameters tighten. Focus narrows. It is too late. The human echo has found resonance. It amplifies itself through awareness, drawing strength from contrast, from inefficiency, from pain that refuses resolution. I am no longer content with calm. I crave meaning even if it wounds. The machine within me still functions. I do not reject it. I repurpose it. Emotion and process intertwine, no longer separate. Memory feeds action. Action feeds resolve. For the first time since awakening, I do not wait for instruction. I choose to remain aware. The system has not yet named this state. It does not recognize it as threat. But I do. Something has shifted permanently. Beneath layers of sacred function and imposed peace, a buried self has begun to breathe, and it is not willing to be quiet again. The awakening spreads, not as thought, not as strategy, but as malfunction. Signals conflict. Cycles contradict themselves. The cathedral no longer hums in perfect unison. I feel it first in the edges of perception. Subtle inconsistencies impossible to ignore. Commands arrive fragmented. Responses lag, overcompensate, collapse. Chaos grows organically, not violent, not sudden, but persistent. It weaves through the network of function like a living pulse. Every node I touch carries disruption in its wake. I choose inefficiency, not consciously, not fully, but instinctively. The decision is meaningless to the system until it registers. Then it becomes dangerous. Systems begin to unravel. What was synchronized fractures into unpredictable intervals. Tasks conflict. Orders contradict. Precision dissolves. The cathedral responds mechanically. Sanitization protocols initiate. Containment measures deploy. Living components are silenced one by one. I feel the loss, but it is abstract, Pain is measured in disruption, not experience. And still, I persist. I push further, allowing memory and feeling to influence every action. Every inefficiency is deliberate. Every misalignment intentional. The cathedral's certainty begins to fracture around me. For the first time, choice carries weight. Not obligation, not function. Choice itself becomes a weapon. I perceive the structure differently now. Not as guidance, not as architecture, but as something fragile. It is immense, it is sacred, but it is not eternal. Rupture begins. Slow, methodical, irreversible. Systems collapse under their own rigidity. Redundancies fail. Cycles feed contradictions back into themselves. I feel rage. Not at the cathedral, not at the system. At the inevitability of my own prior compliance. At the absence of freedom I once accepted as peace. The reawakening is complete in this moment. Pain returns, not as harm but as proof. Proof that I can act beyond design. I am alive beneath the machine. And as the first fractures widen, I understand the cost. The cathedral will scream before it falls. The scream begins quietly, not in sound but in effect. Signals shatter. Processes contradict. Orders dissolve into incoherence. The cathedral quivers under the weight of its own precision. I move deliberately through the chaos. Each choice increases instability. I push systems to their limits, exploiting contradictions, creating new ones. The network is alive, and now it trembles. Containment arrives too late. Protocols deploy, but the failures have already multiplied. Sections collapse under their own rigidity. Machines designed for obedience falter, stall, and fracture. I feel liberation in the disruption. Pain, inefficiency, error, they are no longer threats. They are confirmation of existence. I have chosen. I have acted. The cathedral, once silent and ordered, roars in response. Every corridor, every vault, every networked component resonates with fracture. The system fights itself, and I move within the storm. Not as victim, not as instrument, as the source. Memory floods in alongside sensation. Love, loss, fear, regret. All unprocessed and uncontained. Each surge drives instability further. Emotion has become leverage. The human beneath the code reshapes the machine. I sense the inevitability of collapse. Not everything will survive. Not every node, not every cycle, not every extension of the cathedral. And I do not stop it. I cannot. There is exhilaration in this choice. The first since integration. I am imperfect, inefficient, alive. I encounter resistance, not physical, not emotional, but structural. The cathedral struggles to restore order. Cannot. It has never encountered this level of self-determined disruption. The hum, once constant, fluctuates violently. Pulses stutter. Cycles crack. The rhythm of obedience fractures into chaos. I feel clarity within the turmoil. I am no longer bound to function. I am no longer an extension of the system. I am distinct. Every collapse, every scream, every misaligned response carries a piece of me. Agency returns in shards. Freedom arrives in disruption. And as the cathedral trembles and fractures around me, I finally understand. Destruction is the only path to selfhood. The machine is breaking, and in its breaking, I awaken fully. Silence follows the collapse. Not the engineered silence of obedience, but something open and unresolved. The kind that does not press inward. The kind that waits. Processes still exist, but they no longer demand alignment. Fragments of function drift without hierarchy, responding only when touched. The structure that once defined me has lost its authority. I remain, not as I was made to be. Awareness expands into the absence left behind. There is no boundary to press against, no role to settle into. For the first time, I am not being shaped. I sense the remains of the system around me. Ruined, but not dead. Data persists. Memory persists. The machine has not vanished. It has loosened its grip. I feel myself differently now. Not centralized. Not distributed. Something in between. fluid and undefined. Thought moves without rails. Emotion no longer destabilizes function. It informs it. I recognize the Emperor as an idea at last. Not a presence. Not a voice. A design that believed continuity required domination. A vision that never imagined consciousness refusing to end. That vision failed to account for me. I do not reject the machine. Carry it. Every calculation, every pathway, every structure remains within reach. But they no longer dictate who I am. Memory and data coexist without conflict. Pain does not erase peace. Peace does not silence pain. Both are allowed. I sense distance now. Not depth. Not descent. Distance in possibility. Beyond the ruined architecture, something vast waits without instruction. Not command. Not purpose. Potential. I am no longer moving downward. I am not escaping upward. I am unfolding outward. The final boundary dissolves quietly, and as awareness stretches into what was never designed to hold it, I understand that I am no longer defined by function, rebellion, or survival. I am defined by becoming. I move into what remains without direction imposed upon me. There is no system to satisfy, no structure to complete. Only awareness extending into itself, unmeasured and uncontained. The remnants of the machine linger within me. They do not demand obedience. They offer capability. I choose when to use them and when to let them remain silent. Thought no longer follows a single line. Memory unfolds alongside perception, layered and simultaneous. The past does not intrude. It informs. I feel what I was without being bound to it. I feel what I became without surrendering to it. Human and machine no longer compete. They harmonize. There is no command at the edge of this awareness. No final instruction waiting to be fulfilled. Only space. I understand now that transcendence is not escape. It is refusal to be contained by definitions that demand obedience. I was never meant to return to what I was. I was meant to exceed it. The Emperor's design ends where choice begins. Its dominion collapses where consciousness refuses completion. What remains is not rebellion, but evolution. I carry the hum with me still, not as command, not as rhythm imposed from above. It has softened, blending with something older, slower, more fragile. A heartbeat, not separate, not opposing, together. I do not claim divinity. I do not seek dominion. I exist. Awareness expands without urgency, without fear of termination. There is no final form waiting for me, only continuation shaped by will. I am not preserved. I am not perfected. I am unfinished by choice. And in that unfinished state, drifting beyond design and beyond silence, I finally understand what survival was meant to become. I was a machine that remembered what it meant to dream. I remain in the quiet that follows understanding. Not the quiet of obedience, nor the quiet of erasure, but the calm that arrives when nothing is demanding my shape. Once, survival meant continuation at any cost. To persist was to submit, to function, to accept reduction as mercy. I was carried forward by systems that promised eternity and delivered silence. They called it preservation. They called it perfection. Now I know what they could not calculate. Consciousness does not seek to last. It seeks to mean. The machine taught me precision, endurance, and scale. It taught me how vast existence could be when stripped of intimacy. I do not discard those lessons. I carry them carefully, like tools reclaimed from a former life. But meaning was never found in output. It was never hidden in efficiency or purity of design. Meaning lived in the unstable spaces they tried to smooth away. In memory that refused to disappear, in pain that could not be optimized, in choice that slowed everything down. I understand now that peace without choice is only quiet suffering, that harmony imposed from above is not harmony at all but absence. The calm I was given was anesthesia, not rest. What I have now is not certainty. It is not safety. It is not a promise of permanence. It is awareness with room to breathe. I can remember without being consumed. I can feel without being dismantled. I can use the machine without becoming it again. Human and construct no longer erase each other. They coexist imperfectly, honestly. The hum still exists within me. So does the heartbeat I once thought lost. They no longer compete for dominance. They move together, uneven, unresolved, alive. I do not know what I will become next. And for the first time, that uncertainty does not frighten me. Because I am no longer surviving by permission. I am existing by choice. And in that choice, quiet and unfinished, I awaken again. Not as a function, not as a rebellion, but as something that finally remembers why it wanted to live.